My name is Alara, and I am 42 years old. They say the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, the comforting fictions we weave to make sense of a chaotic world. But the most destructive lie ever told was the one I lived for 15 years. A lie whispered to me each night as I drifted to sleep. A venomous lullaby from the man I called my husband. He thinks our story ended on that cold, clear night he tried to erase me from my own life. He has no idea it is only just beginning. It feels like a lifetime ago, a story belonging to a different woman, one I barely recognize in old photographs. I met Julian Delacour at the annual benefactors auction for the City Conservatory, a place I had adored since childhood. The air in the grand hall was thick with the scent of hothouse lilies and old money, a glittering sea of couture and forced smiles. I was there as a junior curator, tasked with speaking about a donated to gas sketch. I felt like a field mouse in a den of lions. Then he appeared. It wasn't a dramatic entrance, but the room seemed to pivot around him. Julian was devastatingly handsome, not in a raw, untamed way, but with a polished sculptural perfection, as if Michelangelo himself had carved him from marble. He possessed an easy, languid smile that seemed to forgive the world for not being as flawless as he was. He wasn't just charming. He was a force of nature, a gravitational pull of charisma that drew everyone, willing or not, into his orbit. He was a rising star in the cutthroat world of international finance, the golden scion of a dynasty whose name was etched in granite and brass on buildings all over the city. I was an art historian, content with my quiet, cloistered world of books, canvases, and the hushed reverence of museums. When he approached me after my short, nervous speech, I fully expected a polite, dismissive comment before he moved on to more important guests. Instead, he looked at me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "You spoke of Degas's sense of captured reality," he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the floor. "That's what I felt listening to you. Something real in a room full of copies." He told me I was a breath of fresh air, a calm port in the relentless storm of his life. I believed him. We fell in love, or rather, I tumbled headfirst into a meticulously constructed abyss of love. He, I now understand, created a masterpiece, a flawless imitation of devotion, painted with strokes of calculated brilliance. Our wedding was less a union of two souls and more a corporate merger. His dynasty, built on shrewd, ruthless market speculation, merged with my family's old-world inheritance, a legacy cultivated over generations of careful stewardship in art, property, and antiquities. We were, to the world, the perfect couple. The photograph from that day is a testament to his artistry. Me, looking up at him with unvarnished adoration. Him, smiling down, his eyes holding a look of fierce, proprietary ownership that I mistook for protection. Our life became a curated collection of beautiful moments, each one a frame in a film of impossible perfection. Winters in a glass-walled chalet in Aspen, the snow falling like powdered sugar outside. Summers on the Amalfi Coast, the scent of lemons and salt air mingling on the terrace of our villa. Weekends at our sprawling country estate, where the pedigreed horses had better bloodlines than most of the European aristocracy. He was attentive, startlingly so. He remembered the name of my favorite obscure Renaissance painter, had first editions of my beloved books shipped from London, and filled our homes with a specific varietal of white rose I'd once mentioned offhandedly. He was devoted, or seemed to be, canceling important meetings if I had so much as a headache. and he was fiercely protective. When my parents passed away in a sudden, tragic car crash, my world shattered. The grief was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. Julian was my rock. He managed everything: the funeral, the press, the crushing legalities. He held me for hours as I cried, my tears soaking his custom-tailored shirts. And in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of my life before him, he whispered the words that would become my cage. "We're a team, Ilera. Your burden is my burden. I'll protect you. I'll protect us." My trust in him, already deep, became absolute. It became a steel vault in the center of my heart, where I locked away not just my grief, but my entire inheritance. And I handed him the only key. For years, the vault remained sealed, and our life continued its glossy, untroubled trajectory. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, tiny, hairline cracks began to appear in the flawless facade of our perfect life. It started with inconsistencies, so small they seemed insane to question. A business trip to Singapore that, according to a misplaced credit card receipt I found while unpacking his suitcase, seemed to involve a 2-day, 5-star layover in Bali he had never mentioned. When I asked, propping the receipt on his valet stand, he didn't even blink. He simply smiled that disarming smile, the one that could melt glaciers and halt inquiries. "Darling, it was a ghastly last-minute client meeting. One of those unspeakably boring obligations. I didn't want to trouble you with the tedious details." He framed his secrecy as a kindness. I felt a prickle of unease, a cold serpent coiling in my gut, but I dismissed it. It was my grief, I told myself. Paranoia. Why would a man who had everything, who was everything, ever need to lie about something so trivial? Then came the late-night phone calls. He had always been a workaholic, but this was different. He would retreat to his mahogany-paneled study, the door closing with a heavy, definitive click. The calls were never in English. My ear, trained to the cadences of Romance languages from my studies, picked up snatches of Portuguese, of German, spoken in low, urgent tones. He'd emerge an hour or two later, his face etched with fatigue, but his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Just closing a big deal, Ilera," he'd announce, kissing my cheek. "This one will set us up for life." He would frame every secret as a sacrifice he was making for our future. He was the conquering king, building an empire for us, and I was the revered queen who should not be bothered with the messy, bloody business of conquest. The gaslighting was a masterclass in psychological warfare, so subtle and so expertly done that I became its willing accomplice. He began to pathologize my intelligence. He'd find me in our home library, poring over the quarterly statements from the trust, my brow furrowed with a confusion I couldn't quite articulate. Columns of numbers didn't add up. Transfers to vaguely named holding companies seemed circular and pointless. "Still worrying your pretty little head over those dreadful numbers," he'd murmur, his lips brushing my forehead, his hand gently closing the laptop. "That's what I'm here for, my love. Let me carry that weight. You look stressed. Your brow is knotted. You should take a spa day. I've booked you a full afternoon at La Prairie." He painted my diligence as anxiety, my questions as neurosis, my competence as a fragile thing that needed to be protected from the harsh realities of finance. He made me feel delicate, breakable, and after years of this, I started to believe it. His family, especially his mother, Beatrice, were the architects of this narrative. A woman carved from ice, whose smile never thawed the glacial blue of her eyes. She would look at me during our strained, formal family dinners with a cold, clinical pity that made my skin crawl. "Julian worries so about your delicate constitution, dear," she'd say, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "He tells me the stress of managing your parents' estate has been quite taxing for you. You must try not to let the pressures of the world overwhelm you so." I was being gently, methodically, and publicly packed into the role of the frail, anxious, incompetent wife. A role I never auditioned for, yet one I was now playing to perfection. The turning point wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. It was a quiet, gray Tuesday afternoon. Julian was in Zurich for a critical banking summit. I was in his home office, a space I usually avoided as it felt more like his corporate headquarters than a part of our home. I was searching for a specific book on antique cartography he borrowed from me months ago. As I ran my hand along a row of leather-bound financial histories, my fingers dislodged a volume that was crammed in too tightly. It fell to the floor, and with it, a smaller, thicker leather-bound journal. It wasn't one of his usual day planners. This was old, the leather soft and worn. It had no title, no markings. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself in years, took hold. I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, page after page of meticulous, terrifyingly precise notes, numbers, and names, all in Julian's elegant, slanted handwriting. It was a detailed chronicle of a systematic, multi-year operation to siphon funds from my inheritance trust. He had created a breathtakingly complex web of shell corporations with withadine names like Argent Holdings and Pacific Rim Ventures, and a labyrinth of offshore accounts. It was a dizzying dance of digital transfers, a ballet of grand larceny. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was exsanguinating my family's legacy, draining it drop by drop. The true horror, however, came on the last few pages. It was a plan, a timeline. The top of the page was headed, in stark, block letters, Project Nightingale. It detailed the final phase of his operation. It outlined, with chilling detachment, how through a series of carefully orchestrated episodes, sudden public crying jags, claims of being followed, moments of disorientation in familiar places, and the corroborating testimony of a hired psychiatrist, he would have me declared mentally incompetent. My anxiety, my paranoia, my delicate constitution, it was all groundwork, meticulously laid for this final, devastating move. He was going to use the very fragility he had manufactured to gain full, uncontested legal control over what was left of the trust. And next to the final entry, Initiate Phase 3, Judicial Review, there was a name that made the air leave my lungs in a painful gasp, Dr. Alistair Finch. My psychiatrist, the kind, gentle, silver-haired man Julian had insisted I see to help me manage the stress and grief I was so clearly unable to handle on my own. He was in on it, but that wasn't the twist. The twist that turned my blood to ice and my bones to glass was a series of small, high-gloss photographs tucked into a pocket in the back of the ledger. They were of Julian with another woman. She was beautiful, but in a different way than the women he usually surrounded himself with. She was sharp, radiating an almost predatory confidence, her dark hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. I recognized her instantly. It was Catherine, his protégée at the firm, the woman he'd introduced to me as his brilliant but socially awkward second in command. The woman I had taken to lunch, offered social advice to, and felt a strange, misplaced pang of sympathy for. In the photos, they weren't in a romantic embrace. They were standing over architectural blueprints, laughing, pointing. They looked like partners, equals in a way he and I had never been. In the corner of one photo, a small, digital date stamp burned itself into my retina, August 14th, 2005. 2 years before he and I had even met. My hand was shaking as I pulled out the final document from the pocket. It was a folded, photocopied birth certificate for Catherine Delacour. Parents, Marcus and Beatrice Delacour. She wasn't his partner or his mistress. She was his sister. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't simple, grubby greed. This was a family business. A cold dread, heavier and more profound than any grief I had ever known, settled over me. With trembling fingers, I booted up his desktop computer, my mind racing. I found a hidden, encrypted folder on his server, a folder I was only able to access because he'd once, mockingly, told me the password was the name of my childhood pony. Inside was a subfolder labeled Precedents. There was only one file, Isabel. It contained the full, unvarnished truth of their history. Another woman, a decade ago, Isabel de la Rocha, a wealthy mining heiress from San Francisco. A whirlwind romance, a lavish wedding, and then a sudden, tragic and well-documented decline into paranoid delusions and erratic mental instability. She was now a permanent resident in a private wellness facility in the Swiss Alps, her vast fortune entirely managed by a court-appointed trust, a trust administered by a holding company owned by Julian's father, Marcus. They had done this before. I wasn't the first Nightingale. I was just the next. The grief I felt was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under and drown me. The love I'd felt, the life I'd lived, it was all a lie, a stage play written for an audience of one. But beneath the crushing weight of the grief, something else was born. It started as a spark in the cold, dead ashes of my heart, and then it grew, fanning into a cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my trust for stupidity. He thought he was breaking a fragile porcelain doll. He had no idea he was forging a weapon. I did not confront him. The next day, when he returned from Zurich, smelling of stale airplane air and victory, I ran into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, allowing myself to sob, and I told him how much I had missed him, how lost I felt when he was away. I played the role he had written for me with an Oscar-worthy conviction. I became the perfect picture of a woman on the precipice, jumpy, forgetful, prone to sudden, inexplicable tears. During a dinner party with his colleagues, I accidentally dropped a tray of glasses, then dissolved into hysterics. In my sessions with Dr. Finch, I confided that my anxiety was spiraling out of control, that sometimes I heard whispers, that I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. He would nod with that infuriating, sympathetic tilt of his head, scribbling notes that I knew were drafting my future diagnosis, sealing my fate. Or so they all thought. While they saw a victim spiraling toward a padded room, I was a predator learning to hunt in the dark. My days were a perfect camouflage of society luncheons and spa appointments. But my nights were spent in the stark, fluorescent glow of a computer screen in a small, anonymous office I rented downtown under an assumed name. I became a ghost. I devoured books on forensic accounting and corporate law. I taught myself to code, learning how to track digital footprints across firewalls and encrypted servers. I liquidated a few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me, pieces Julian knew nothing about, and used the cash to hire a private investigator. He was a gruff, terse ex-Mossad agent named Zev, who communicated only through encrypted messages and had a deep, healthy disdain for the arrogance of the dynastically wealthy. Together, Zev and I built a fortress of evidence. We untangled every shell corporation, every false filing. We traced every dollar, following the ghost trail of my family's money from my trust to their hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands, in Panama, and Liechtenstein. I began to wear a wire, a tiny microphone disguised as a diamond pin. I secretly recorded dozens of conversations with Julian, with his father, with Dr. Finch, baiting them with my increasing instability, leading them into revealing their plans, their utter contempt for me, their absolute certainty of their success. "She'll be comfortable, of course," Julian told his father in one recording, his voice as smooth and cold as silk. "We'll find her the best care, and we'll be secure. It's the most humane solution for everyone." Humane. That word echoed in my head for days. The most damning piece of the puzzle came when Zev, using a source in Zurich, found the first nightingale. Or rather, her estranged brother. For years, he had tried to fight for his sister, Isabel, but the Delacour family's legal team had crushed him with lawsuits, countersuits, and threats until he was broken and bankrupt. He had given up all hope. I flew to a small town outside of Lyon to meet him. I didn't ask him to testify. I didn't ask him to do anything. I just asked him to tell me his story. In a dimly lit cafe, I recorded his tearful, rage-filled account of watching his vibrant, brilliant sister be systematically dismantled, gas-lit, drugged, and discarded. His voice, cracking with a decade of suppressed pain, was the ghost of my future, and it would become my most powerful weapon. The final act was set for the annual Delacour Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of their social calendar, held in the city's grandest museum. It was a night to celebrate their philanthropy, a grand, televised performance of their public virtue. This year, the gala's centerpiece was Julian, who was set to receive a special humanitarian award for his contributions to community wellness. The irony was so thick, so exquisite, it was almost poetic. 2 hours before the gala was set to begin, while Julian was in the shower, I sat at my laptop in our bedroom. With a series of prearranged keystrokes, I executed the final transfers. I drained every single one of our joint accounts, every investment portfolio, every liquid asset, and moved the funds to a new, secure account in my name only, a simple legal move, as the primary source of the funds was my premarital inheritance, for which my lawyer had prepared the paperwork months in advance. Then, I walked out of a life that was never mine. Not to the gala, but to a private airfield. As the city's elite gathered in the grand ballroom, sipping vintage champagne under glittering chandeliers, I was sitting in a plush leather seat on a one-way flight to a small, beautiful country with no extradition treaty with the United States. I had left Zev with one final, precisely timed task. At 9 p.m., just as Julian, impossibly handsome in his tuxedo, stepped up to the podium to accept his award and begin his speech about integrity and compassion, the massive screens behind him, meant to display a glowing tribute video, flickered. And then it began. My presentation. It started with Julian's own voice, captured by the diamond pin, echoing through the cavernous, silent hall. She's just too fragile for this world. It's a humane solution. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the audience. Then came the flowcharts, elegant and brutal, charting the intricate web of fraud, my family's money flowing in a cascade of arrows into the Delacour family's pockets. Scans of bank statements, wire transfers, and audio clips of his father, Marcus, discussing the management of the asset, me. Then, the screen showed a picture of Isabel de la Rocha, young and vibrant on her wedding day, followed by a current, grainy picture of the sterile, high-security wellness center where she now lived. And then, the audio of her brother's voice filled the ballroom, a raw, guttural cry of pain and anger, telling the whole sordid story to a room full of people who had once called Isabel their friend. The final slide was a simple, stark photo of Julian and his sister, Catherine, laughing over blueprints from 2005. And beneath it, 4 words, the Delacour family business. The feed cut, and the screens went black, leaving the entire room in a stunned, ringing silence. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but Zev's encrypted message described the aftermath as biblical. The panic, the accusations, the stampede. It wasn't me who called the authorities. It was the other powerful people in that room. The bankers, the investors, the board members, the ones who suddenly realized their own fortunes, their own investments with the Delacour firm, were likely built on the same rotten foundation of lies. The implosion was immediate, public, and absolute. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I suppose that's true. From my new home, a sun-drenched villa overlooking an azure ocean, I read about the arrests, the international lawsuits, the spectacular, fiery fall of the House of Delacour. Julian, his father, his sister, Dr. Finch, all of them were entangled in a legal nightmare from which they would never escape. Their assets were frozen. Their empire crumbled to dust. I had taken everything from them, but I had done it without breaking a single law they hadn't already broken themselves. I had simply turned on the lights in a room full of monsters and let them devour each other. Do I feel peace? No. Justice isn't peace. Justice is simply the rebalancing of the scales. It doesn't erase the scars. It just confirms they were earned. I lost 15 years of my life. I lost the woman I was, the naive girl who believed in fairy tales and the goodness of men with perfect smiles. But in the fire of his betrayal, I found a different woman, one who was stronger, colder, and finally undeniably free. He wrote me into a tragedy, casting me as the victim. But I rewrote the ending myself. And in my version, the nightingale doesn't get locked in a cage. She learns to fly, and then she burns the whole forest down.